There's a particular kind of silence that settles over a house after a party ends, glasses still sweating on the counters, someone's coat forgotten on the banister, the air thick with perfume and spilled wine. I've always liked that silence. That night, I didn't know it would be the last time I liked it. My name is Matthew. I'm 34, I work in operations for a logistics company most people have never heard of, and for 9 years I've been married to a woman named Phoebe. 9 years. Long enough that I stopped counting the anniversaries out loud and started just feeling them arrive, quietly, like weather. That night was the company's 10th anniversary party, a big one, catered, 120 people crammed into the community hall 2 blocks from our house. Phoebe had helped organize it. She was good at that kind of thing, the kind of woman who could walk into a room of strangers and leave with everyone remembering her name. I used to find that impressive. I still did, mostly. I just hadn't asked myself lately what it cost. I remember standing near the drinks table with a glass of something amber I wasn't really drinking, watching her laugh at something a colleague said, her hand briefly resting on his forearm the way it always did. Phoebe touched people when she talked, it meant nothing, I'd told myself that for years. Rowan, her closest friend, was beside me, half watching the room the way people do at parties they didn't really want to attend. You look like you're doing math, Rowan said. I'm doing math, I admitted. Trying to figure out how many more hours until I can take my shoes off. She laughed, but it didn't quite reach her eyes. I noticed that. I filed it away without knowing why, one of those small human gestures you catalog and forget, until later, when it turns out to matter more than you thought. Somewhere around 10, Phoebe disappeared. Not dramatically, she just wasn't where I'd last seen her, and when I asked a coworker if she'd seen my wife, the woman shrugged and said something about the upstairs offices, probably grabbing more folding chairs. It was a plausible answer. The community hall had a second floor with a few admin rooms, and folding chairs did, in fact, live up there. I believed it the way you believe things you haven't been given a reason not to. I want to stop here for a second. If you've ever stood in a crowded room, surrounded by people who all seem to know exactly where they belong, and felt a small cold thread of doubt work its way up through your chest for no reason you could name, you already know the feeling I'm describing. I didn't have a reason yet. I just had the thread. I went looking for her, more out of boredom than suspicion. The stairwell at the back of the hall was dim, lit by one flickering overhead bulb, and as I climbed, I heard it, laughter. Hers. Low, easy, familiar in a way that made something in my chest tighten before my mind had caught up with why. I didn't think anything of it. Not yet. People laugh at parties. My wife laughed easily, always had, it was one of the first things I loved about her, back when we were 25 and reckless and certain the whole world was going to be kind to us. I reached the top of the stairs. The door to the small admin office was mostly closed, just a few inches of gap, warm light spilling out into the dark hallway. I could hear 2 voices now, hers, and a man's, low and unhurried, the kind of voice that belonged to someone who wasn't in a hurry to be found. I didn't push the door open. I want to be honest about that, because it says something about me that I'm not proud of. I stood there, in the dark, and I listened for a moment longer than I should have, not because I suspected anything yet, but because some old animal instinct in me already knew, before my mind was willing to admit it, that whatever was happening on the other side of that door wasn't about folding chairs. I caught a name. John. I knew a John, vaguely, one of the newer account managers, a man I'd shaken hands with maybe twice, forgettable in the way most work party acquaintances are forgettable. I didn't think much of it. Why would I? My wife knew dozens of people at that party better than I did. Then I heard her laugh again, that same easy, low laugh, followed by something quieter, something I couldn't make out, and a silence that stretched half a second too long to be nothing. I stepped back from the door before either of them could see me. I told myself, walking back down that dim stairwell, that I hadn't heard anything. That I'd interrupted nothing. That there was nothing to interrupt. I found Rowan by the drinks table again, and when she asked where I'd disappeared to, I said I'd gone looking for the bathroom. It was the first lie of the night. It would not be the last, though most of the ones that followed wouldn't be mine. Phoebe came back down 20 minutes later, cheeks a little flushed, her explanation ready before I'd even asked. She'd been helping someone find extra chairs, the storage closet was a mess. Could I believe it? I said I could believe it. I smiled. I even meant it, mostly, because the alternative, actually turning that half-formed thread of doubt over in my hands and looking at it directly, felt like more than I wanted to carry at 11 o'clock on a Friday night. We drove home with the radio low and her hand resting on my knee at a red light, the way it had 1,000 times before, and I remember thinking, with a kind of relief I'm almost embarrassed to admit now, see, everything's fine. I didn't know it yet, but that door, the 2 inches of gap, the warm light, the laugh that lasted half a second too long, wasn't the last thing I'd need to walk past pretending I hadn't noticed. It was only the first. The week after the party settled back into its usual rhythm, the way weeks do when you let them. I went to work. Phoebe went to work. We ate dinner most nights at the kitchen island because we'd never gotten around to replacing the dining table we sold when we moved in, 6 years ago, promising ourselves we'd buy a better one eventually. We never did. Some promises just quietly stop being promises and become the way things are. I didn't think about the office door again. Not really. Or, that's not honest. I thought about it the way you think about a word on the tip of your tongue, present but unreachable, there and not there at the same time. I'd catch myself, loading the dishwasher or driving to work, running the sound of that laugh back through my head, and then I'd catch myself doing it and feel a little ridiculous, and stop. I realize now that this was the first mistake, not doubting her, but doubting my own doubt. I had a feeling and I argued myself out of trusting it, because trusting it would have meant admitting something I wasn't ready to admit. I didn't ask her a single direct question that whole week. Not because I didn't want to know. Because some part of me was already afraid of the shape the answer might take. Phoebe, for her part, seemed normal. Better than normal, almost. She was warmer that week, more affectionate, the kind of attentive she used to be in the early years, before life got busy and comfortable and a little dull in the specific way marriages get dull, not unhappily, just, quietly. She made my coffee the way I liked it 2 mornings in a row. She asked about my day and actually listened to the answer. I remember thinking, with a small flush of guilt for ever having doubted her, maybe I imagined it. Maybe the party just made me strange for one night. Looking back now, I understand that warmth differently. At the time I read it as reassurance. It wasn't. It was compensation. The first thing I actually noticed, really noticed, not just felt, happened on a Tuesday. Phoebe's phone, which usually sat face up on the kitchen counter while she cooked, buzzed with a text, and without seeming to think about it, she reached over and flipped it face down. It was such a small motion. I don't think she was even aware she'd done it. I definitely wasn't supposed to notice. I didn't say anything. I told myself it was nothing, everyone flips their phone over sometimes, it doesn't mean anything, people are private about all kinds of ordinary things. I want to be honest with you, I believed that explanation because I needed to, not because it was the most likely one. That Thursday, Rowan came over for what had become a semi-regular ritual, the 3 of us, sometimes just the 2 women, sharing a bottle of wine on the back porch while I made myself scarce with a book I wasn't really reading. I caught fragments of their conversation drifting through the screen door. Mostly ordinary. Work complaints, something about Rowan's upstairs neighbor, a show they were both watching. But at one point I heard Phoebe's voice drop, quieter, more urgent, and Rowan say something back, sharp, almost, that I couldn't make out at all. Then silence. Then, a few seconds later, Phoebe laughing too loudly, too quickly, the kind of laugh that exists to fill a gap rather than express anything. I didn't ask Rowan about it later, when she was leaving and I walked her to her car the way I always did. I wanted to. The question sat right there in my chest, ready. But something in Rowan's face, a kind of careful blankness, a woman working hard to look like she wasn't thinking about anything in particular, made me swallow it instead. If I'd asked her that night in the driveway, instead of 3 weeks later, I wonder now how much earlier everything would have unraveled. Work stayed busy, which helped, in the sense that busyness is always the easiest place to hide from a thought you don't want to have. But little things kept surfacing, small and disconnected, the way pieces of a puzzle look like nothing until enough of them are on the table. Phoebe started going to a new gym. That part was reasonable enough on its own. Plenty of people decide, out of nowhere, to take their health seriously. But the schedule was strange. Tuesday and Thursday evenings, sometimes Saturday mornings, always alone, always described in the vaguest possible terms. Just a class. You wouldn't like it. I'll be back by 8. I never asked which gym. I told myself it didn't matter. I want to stop here and say plainly, it did matter. I just didn't yet have the courage to treat it like it mattered. One Thursday, she came home a little after 9, later than usual, hair still slightly damp, which made sense. She'd been at the gym, except when I hugged her hello, I didn't smell chlorine or sweat or any of the ordinary residue of exertion. I smelled her perfume, fresh, reapplied. I noticed it the way you notice a wrong note in a song you know well, not loud, not obvious, just off. I didn't say anything. I kissed her forehead and asked if she wanted dinner reheated, and she said yes, and we ate at the kitchen island the way we always did, and somewhere underneath the ordinary rhythm of that evening, a small, cold certainty was beginning to take root in me that I wasn't yet willing to name. That's the strange thing about denial, nobody tells you when you start doing it. It doesn't announce itself. It just becomes the water you're swimming in, and you don't notice you're wet. The following week, I ran into John by accident, an actual accident, nothing engineered, in the break room at a joint meeting between our departments. He was younger than I'd remembered, easy smile, the kind of confident that comes from never really having been told no. He shook my hand and said, "You're Phoebe's husband, right?" Great party she helped put together, and something in the way he said her name, casual, but a half beat too careful, made the hair on my arms rise before I'd consciously registered why. I said something polite. I don't remember what. I remember walking back to my desk afterward with my heart doing something strange and irregular in my chest, and thinking, for the first time in words rather than feeling, something is wrong, and I have been choosing, for 2 weeks now, not to look at it directly. I didn't confront her that night either. I told myself I needed more than a feeling. I told myself I was being paranoid, unfair, that 9 years of trust didn't deserve to be thrown away over a flipped-over phone and a perfume I couldn't quite place and a man's slightly too careful pronunciation of my wife's name. I didn't know it yet, but the gym bag sitting untouched by the front door, the one she carried out every Tuesday and Thursday and never once seemed to actually use, was about to become the smallest, strangest piece of evidence in a picture I wasn't ready to see whole. The gym bag became my quiet obsession, though I would never have called it that at the time. I told myself I was just paying attention. There's a difference between paying attention and hunting for something to be wrong, and I spent most of that month telling myself I was doing the first when I was already, unmistakably, doing the second. It was a plain black duffel, nothing remarkable about it, the kind you'd find in any big box sporting goods aisle. Phoebe kept it by the front door on the days she went to her class, and she'd sling it over her shoulder on her way out with a kiss and a back by 8, and I'd sit there with my book, or my laptop, or whatever prop I was using that particular evening to look like a man who wasn't watching his wife's front door choreography like it was surveillance footage. One Tuesday, I unzipped it. I'm not proud of that. I want to be honest with you about the specific shape of my own dishonesty in this story, because I wasn't some blameless observer standing outside events. I was a man who searched his wife's gym bag while she was in the shower, heart hammering, telling myself I had every right and knowing, somewhere underneath that I was crossing a line I couldn't uncross. Inside, a folded towel, still creased from the store, never used. A water bottle, dry. A pair of leggings with the tag still attached. I sat back on my heels in our bedroom, staring at that bag, and felt something in my chest go very still and very cold. Not surprise, exactly. Confirmation. The particular, sick relief of finally being allowed to stop pretending you don't already know something. Looking back now, that was the moment I should have asked her directly. I had proof enough, right there in my hands, to simply say her name and ask the question. I didn't. I zipped the bag back up exactly the way I'd found it, and I said nothing, because some part of me had already decided, without fully admitting it to myself, that if I was going to do this, I wanted to do it right. I wanted more than a story I could tell myself in the dark. I wanted something undeniable. I want to stop here for a second, because I think this is the part where you either understand me or you don't. I didn't confront her that night, or the next, or the one after that. I went to work. I made dinner. I let her tell me about her class. She'd started inventing small details by then, an instructor's name, a complaint about the parking, and I nodded along and asked follow-up questions I already knew were feeding a lie, because some cold, unfamiliar part of me had decided that the only way to survive what was coming was to become very good, very quickly, at watching. That was the version of me nobody at that party would have recognized. I didn't recognize him either, some nights. It was around this time that Rowan started acting strange in a different way, not distant like she'd been that night on the porch, but the opposite. She started calling me. Small, ordinary reasons at first. Did I know a good plumber? Had I seen a movie she was thinking about watching? But there was something underneath the calls, a hesitation before she said goodbye, like she was working up to something and losing her nerve every time. On the third call, I finally asked her directly. Rowan. Is something going on with Phoebe? The silence on the other end lasted long enough that I thought the call had dropped. Then, why would you ask that? Because you keep almost telling me something and then not telling me. Another silence. Then, quieter, I can't. She's my friend, Matthew. I can't be the one. She hung up before I could push further, and I sat there holding my phone, understanding two things at once, that whatever this was, it was real enough that her closest friend already knew and was drowning in the weight of not telling me, and that I was now, whether I wanted it or not, running out of road to keep pretending. I didn't know it then, but that phone call would matter more than either of us understood in the moment, not because of what Rowan said, but because of what she didn't, and the guilt that silence would eventually turn into. The following Saturday, Phoebe left for her morning class at 9, gym bag over her shoulder, and I did something I'd never done in 9 years of marriage. I followed her. I kept 2 cars back the whole way, hands sweating on the wheel, feeling like a stranger in my own life. She didn't drive toward the gym she claimed to belong to. She drove 20 minutes across town, to a part of the city I barely knew, and parked outside a boutique hotel with a discreet awning and valet parking she didn't use. I parked half a block down and watched her walk in, not rushed, not furtive, just a woman walking into a hotel like she'd done it 100 times before, which, I understood with a lurch in my stomach, she probably had. I didn't go in. I told myself I wasn't ready, that I needed more than this, that walking into that lobby and making a scene would hand her the exact story she'd need to turn this around on me. My paranoid husband followed me and humiliated me in public. I sat in my car for 40 minutes, and when John's car pulled into the same lot 15 minutes later and he walked in through the same doors without so much as glancing around, something in me went very quiet and very clear. I understood, in that parking lot, something I hadn't let myself understand before. I hadn't been building a marriage for the last few months. I'd been maintaining the appearance of one, and telling myself that was the same thing. I drove home before she came back out. I don't know why. Maybe because I didn't trust what my face would do if I saw her walk out of that hotel and had to sit across from her at a red light afterward, her hand on my knee, the way it always was. That evening, she came home a little after 1, hair damp, the shower excuse, again, always the shower, and told me the class had run long, and there'd been a smoothie place afterward with the other women from the group, and she was starving. Did I want to order in? I ordered Thai food. I asked about the smoothie place. I smiled at the answer. Somewhere in the middle of that dinner, watching her laugh at something on her phone, scrolling with the same easy unbothered rhythm she'd always had, I felt something shift in me permanently, not heartbreak yet, not really, that would come later, in its own time. What I felt that night was colder than heartbreak. It was the birth of a plan. I didn't know exactly what I was going to do yet. But I knew, sitting there with pad thai going cold in front of me and my wife laughing 3 feet away at a joke from a life I wasn't part of, that I wasn't going to walk into this the way I'd walked into that stairwell at the party, hesitating in the dark, backing away before I could see clearly. The next time I found that door open, I promised myself, I wasn't going to look away. I didn't sleep much that week. Not in any dramatic, storybook way. I still went to work, still made coffee, still functioned like a man with an ordinary life. But somewhere underneath the surface, a second version of me had started operating on a separate track, quiet and methodical, cataloging everything. I want to be honest about something here. What I did next wasn't entirely admirable, and I've made a kind of peace with that, but I don't want to pretend it was clean. I started checking things I had no right to check. Her laptop, left open one evening while she showered, I didn't hack anything, I didn't need to, she'd never logged out of her email. I told myself this was different from spying, that a wife who'd already lied to my face about hotels and smoothie places had forfeited some claim to privacy. I still don't know if that's true. I know it's what I told myself, and I know it worked well enough to let me keep going. There wasn't much in the email, nothing incriminating, at least not directly. But there was a calendar invite, unlabeled except for a time and a location, the same boutique hotel, recurring every Tuesday and Saturday, going back 4 months. 4 months. Not weeks. Months. Something tightened in my chest reading that, a physical sensation, like a hand closing slowly around something inside my ribs. 4 months meant this wasn't a mistake, a single lapse in judgment I could someday, in some version of myself, have found a way to forgive. 4 months meant a second life, running in parallel with mine, patient and deliberate. I copied the dates down on a piece of paper I kept folded in my wallet, which feels almost comically old-fashioned now, but I didn't trust myself to keep anything digital that Phoebe might stumble across. I was, by then, thinking like someone building a case, not someone processing a betrayal. I understand now that those were 2 different jobs, and I was doing the first one because I wasn't ready to do the second. Rowan called again that Wednesday. This time, when I picked up, she didn't ease into it with small talk. I need to tell you something, and I need you to promise you won't tell Phoebe I told you. I promised. It was, I'll admit, an easy promise to make, given everything I already suspected. She's been seeing someone. From work. I've known for a while, she told me, and I told her she needed to stop, or tell you, or something, and she kept saying she would and she never did, and I can't, her voice broke slightly. I can't keep pretending I don't know when I'm sitting across from you at dinner. I asked her, as calmly as I could manage, how long she'd known. 2 months, she said. 2 months of sitting on our back porch drinking wine with my wife while carrying that weight in silence, torn between loyalty to a friend and guilt toward a man she also considered a friend, unsure which betrayal was worse, telling, or not telling. I didn't blame Rowan for the silence, not really, not even then. I understood something in that moment about the impossible geometry of loyalty, how it's never actually a straight line between 2 people, how it bends and strains under weight it was never built to hold. Rowan hadn't chosen a side. She'd just been standing too close to the blast when it went off. She told me one more thing before we hung up, a small detail that would matter more than either of us understood at the time. Phoebe had asked her, weeks earlier, to cover for her on a night she claimed she'd be at Rowan's, but wasn't. Rowan had gone along with it once, reluctantly, and never again. I filed that away. A lie with a witness is a different kind of lie than a lie with no one watching. I started documenting properly after that call, not out of some cold detective instinct, though it might read that way now, but because I understood, with a clarity that frightened me a little, that if I confronted her with nothing but suspicion, she would have every advantage. Denial. Tears. The chance to reframe the story before I'd even finished telling it. I'd watched her do smaller versions of that kind of maneuvering my whole marriage, turning an argument about dishes into an argument about my tone, turning a missed dinner into evidence that I didn't appreciate her. I wasn't going to hand her that same room to work in this time. I photographed the calendar entries. I wrote down license plate numbers from the hotel parking lot on the 2 Saturdays I followed her again, parked far enough back that I don't think she ever noticed. I started keeping a small notebook in my glove compartment, dates and times, nothing editorializing, just facts, because facts were the only thing I trusted myself with anymore. My own feelings had become unreliable territory, grief and rage and a strange, persistent tenderness all tangled together, none of them useful for the job I'd set myself. There's a moment I still think about from that period, one of the stranger ones. I was at the hotel a third time, sitting in my car across the street, when I saw John arrive first, alone, and stand near the entrance checking his phone. He looked, for just a moment, nervous, glancing at his watch, running a hand through his hair, the posture of a man waiting for someone he wasn't entirely sure would show up. It struck me, watching him, that I had no idea what this actually was to him. A conquest. A relationship he believed in. Something he was as trapped by as I felt trapped by not knowing. I didn't feel sympathy for him, exactly. But I understood, in that moment, that he wasn't a cartoon villain either. He was just a man making a choice, the same as Phoebe, the same as me, and choices have their own weight regardless of what side of the betrayal you're standing on. Phoebe arrived 12 minutes later. I watched them meet at the entrance, no dramatic kiss, nothing cinematic, just a hand briefly at the small of her back as they walked in together, an intimacy so casual it was almost worse than anything more obvious would have been. That was the gesture of two people who'd stopped being careful. Who believed, by now, that they'd never be caught. I photographed that too. I'm not proud of how steady my hands were doing it. That same week, a smaller thread I'd almost forgotten resurfaced. My coworker Dana, someone I'd mentioned Phoebe's gym schedule to once, in passing, months earlier, back when I still believed it, mentioned, unprompted, that her sister actually worked the front desk at that same boutique hotel. It was a coincidence, the kind of small world detail that exists constantly in a mid-sized city and means nothing on its own, except that it gave me an idea I hadn't considered, a witness with no reason to lie, no loyalty to Phoebe at all, who might confirm what I already knew from the outside looking in. I didn't approach Dana's sister directly, that felt like a line even I wasn't willing to cross, dragging a stranger into the wreckage of my marriage. But I filed the detail away, another card in a hand I was quietly building into something I hoped would be undeniable. By the end of that week, I had what I needed. Screenshots of the calendar. Photographs from 2 separate Saturdays. A timeline, in Phoebe's own handwriting inside a notebook I found and returned before she noticed it missing, that referenced dates I already had documented elsewhere, dates that lined up perfectly, damningly, with every excuse she'd fed me for 4 months. I sat with all of it spread across the kitchen table late one night, after she'd gone to bed, and felt something I hadn't expected to feel, not triumph, not even relief. Just a terrible, quiet clarity, the kind that arrives after a long fever finally breaks and leaves you hollowed out and strangely calm in its wake. I understood then that denial isn't weakness. It's a decision. You choose it because the alternative costs more than you're ready to pay, and I had spent 4 months paying a much larger, much quieter price instead, my own sense of what was real. I didn't know yet exactly how I was going to do this, whether to confront her privately, or whether some part of me, the part that had spent 4 months swallowing lie after lie in silence, needed witnesses the way she'd had witnesses to her own performance of a happy marriage. I didn't know yet what Rowan would do when the moment came, or whether John would show his face at all once the truth was out in the open. What I did know, closing that notebook and turning off the kitchen light, was that the folder sitting in a locked drawer in my home office, screenshots, photographs, dates, all of it, wasn't the last piece of evidence I'd need before this was over. It was only the piece that made everything after it possible. I chose a Sunday. Phoebe's family and closest friends had already been planning a small gathering at our house for weeks, nothing formal, just people drifting through with wine and appetizers to celebrate her sister's engagement. I let the plan stand. I didn't cancel anything. I understood, by then, exactly what kind of room I wanted this to happen in, and it wasn't an empty one. Rowan came early, an hour before the other guests, at my request. I told her everything, showed her the folder, laid it out on the kitchen table the way I had that night alone, and watched her face move through several emotions at once: recognition, guilt, and finally something like relief, the specific relief of a person who has been carrying a secret alone and is finally allowed to set it down. "I should have told you months ago," she said quietly. "You told me what you could," I said, and I meant it. I wasn't interested in punishing Rowan for the particular geometry of her loyalty. I needed her now, not as a witness against Phoebe, but as someone steady in a room that was about to become anything but. By 4 o'clock, the house was full. Phoebe's parents, her sister and the sister's fiancé, 3 of her co-workers, Rowan's husband, a scattering of neighbors. Phoebe moved through the crowd the way she always did at gatherings, luminous, easy, refilling glasses, laughing at the right moments, entirely unaware that she was standing in the last hour of a life she thought was still hers to control. I waited until most people had a drink in hand and the noise in the room had settled into that comfortable mid-party hum. Then I asked for everyone's attention. I want to be honest, my voice shook a little at first. 9 years doesn't disappear just because you've spent a month documenting its unraveling. I want to say something, I said, and I need Phoebe to hear it in front of everyone here, because I've spent the last month hearing things in private that never matched what I was told in public. The room went quiet in that particular way rooms go quiet right before something breaks. Phoebe's smile faltered, then reset, brittle. "Matthew, what are you doing?" "I know about John," I said. "I know about the hotel. Tuesdays and Saturdays, for at least 4 months. I have the dates. I have photographs." The silence that followed had a texture to it, I could feel it pressing against my skin. Phoebe's face went through several rapid transformations, confusion first, genuine or performed, I couldn't tell. Then something colder, more controlled. "This is insane," she said, loud enough for the room. "You followed me. You've been spying on me. Everyone, I am so sorry, my husband has clearly lost his mind. I have photographs, Phoebe." I kept my voice level. "It cost me everything to keep it that way. From the parking lot. From your own calendar, which you never bothered to make private. I have a notebook in your handwriting that lines up with every one of them. You went through my things." Her voice climbed, sharp, aimed now at making me the villain of the room rather than answering anything. "This is exactly what I'm talking about, this controlling, paranoid, do you all see this? Do you see what I've been living with?" Phoebe's mother made a small, distressed sound. Her father's face had gone very still, the particular stillness of a man doing math he didn't want to do. Rowan stood near the kitchen doorway, arms crossed, saying nothing yet, her jaw tight. "I'm not the one who needs to explain a hotel room," I said quietly. "There is no hotel room. This is," she laughed, high and unconvincing, looking around at the frozen faces surrounding her, searching for an ally and finding none arriving fast enough. "This is humiliating, Matthew, is this what you wanted? To do this here, in front of everyone?" "I wanted witnesses," I said, "because I spent 4 months being the only one who didn't know." That was when John's name came up again, not from me, but from Phoebe's sister, quietly, almost involuntarily. "Wait. John from her office? The one from the anniversary party?" Phoebe's composure cracked for just a fraction of a second, a flinch, quickly smoothed over, and in that gap, Rowan finally spoke. "She told me, Phoebe. Months ago. I told you to end it or tell him yourself. I'm sorry. I can't do this anymore." The room turned toward Rowan now, and something in Phoebe's face collapsed slightly, not into confession, not yet, but into the particular fury of someone who has just watched their last ally step away from the fire. "You told him?" Phoebe's voice cracked, somewhere between betrayal and disbelief, as if Rowan's honesty were the crime instead of the affair itself. "After everything, Rowan, I trusted you. You asked me to lie for you, Rowan said, quiet but unwavering. I did it once. I'm done. Phoebe's mother stepped forward then, her voice trembling. Phoebe. Is this true? And there it was, the question that finally had nowhere left to hide. Phoebe stood in the middle of the room, surrounded by 9 years of people who loved her, her mouth opening and closing around words that wouldn't quite form, panic rising visibly under the surface of her skin, her hands twisting together in a way I'd never seen her do before, not once, in 9 years of marriage. Her voice broke. It's not, it wasn't supposed to. She didn't finish the sentence. She looked at me, then at her mother, then at Rowan, and something in her seemed to finally understand that there was no version of this room she could talk her way back out of. But the words themselves, the real explanation, the why, stayed locked behind her teeth. She shook her head, pressed a hand over her mouth, and walked quickly out through the back door into the yard, alone, leaving a room full of stunned, silent people behind her. Her father moved to follow. I put a hand lightly on his arm. Give her a minute, I said, and something in my voice must have carried enough weight that he stopped. I want to stop here, briefly. There's a particular kind of quiet that comes after a truth finally breaks the surface of a room, no shouting, no tears yet, just people recalibrating everything they thought they understood about two other people's marriage. Maybe you felt an echo of that quiet somewhere in your own life. I hope, if you have, it wasn't standing in your own living room. The party dissolved from there, quietly, awkwardly, guests finding their coats without quite meeting each other's eyes, Phoebe's mother crying softly by the window, her father standing at the back door for a long time, watching his daughter sit alone on the porch steps in the fading light, not going to her, not yet. John never showed up that day. I found out later, from Rowan, that Phoebe had texted him the moment she stepped outside, panicked, incoherent, telling him it was over, that everyone knew, and that he should have the decency not to make it worse by appearing. He didn't reply for almost an hour. When he finally did, it was 4 words, I told you this would happen. Phoebe didn't come back inside until almost everyone had gone. When she finally did, her makeup streaked, her voice hoarse from crying alone in the cold, she didn't offer the confession I think everyone in that emptied living room had been braced for. She just looked at me and said, we need to talk. Not like this. Not tonight. I agreed. Not because I owed her gentleness, some part of me still isn't sure I did, but because I understood, watching her stand there hollowed out and finally out of performances, that whatever explanation she owed me wasn't going to arrive under the weight of an audience. It was going to arrive later, quieter, when there was no one left to perform for. I didn't know it yet, standing in my ruined living room among abandoned wine glasses and my mother-in-law's quiet weeping, that the conversation waiting for me 2 days later would be harder to sit through than the confrontation itself had been. 2 days later, Phoebe asked to meet at a coffee shop halfway between our house and her sister's, where she'd been staying since the party. Neutral ground, I understood, she didn't want to do this in the house we'd shared for 6 years, surrounded by the wreckage of what that house used to mean. She looked different. Smaller, somehow, stripped of the polish she usually carried like armor. No makeup. Her hands wrapped around a coffee cup she never drank from. I owe you an explanation, she said. Not an excuse. I know there isn't one. But you deserve to actually hear it, not just piece it together from a notebook. I didn't say anything. I just waited. She finally spoke. This is what she told me. It started small, smaller than you'd think something this big is supposed to start. It was after the Fisher account fell apart, back in the spring. I was drowning at work, and John was the only one who seemed to actually notice, who asked if I was okay and meant it. We got coffee once, just to talk about the account. It felt harmless. I told myself it was harmless. The first time I let it become something else, we were at a work dinner and everyone else had left, and he said something that made me laugh in a way I hadn't laughed in months, and he touched my hand, and I didn't move it away. That's the moment, if you want one moment, I didn't move my hand away. And I told myself, this is nothing, this is just one dinner, no one will ever know and it doesn't have to mean anything. Except it kept meaning something. Every time I told myself it would be the last time, I found a reason it wasn't. I got good at the lying, scarily good, actually, good enough that I started to disturb myself. I'd stand in our kitchen making up a story about a gym class I'd never actually attended and feel almost nothing while I said it, and that frightened me more than the affair itself did. I didn't recognize the person who could do that so easily. I was terrified of you finding out. Every single time my phone buzzed at dinner, some part of me flinched, waiting. But underneath that fear was a worse one, that if I stopped, I'd have to go back to just being ordinary again, tired and stretched thin and unremarkable, and some ugly part of me didn't want to give that feeling up, even while I hated myself for it. There were nights I'd come home and see the two of us in family photos on the hallway wall and I couldn't look at them straight on. I'd walk past at an angle, like a coward, like I could avoid the accusation in our own wedding picture just by not meeting its eyes. I don't think I've looked directly at that photo in almost 4 months. I tried to stop once. In July. I told John it was over, and I meant it for about 9 days. Then he texted asking how I was doing, nothing more than that, and I answered, and within a week we were back at the hotel like nothing had happened. That's the part I'm most ashamed of, not the affair itself, but how easily I let myself go back, how thin my own resolve turned out to be when I actually tested it. I'm not telling you this so you'll forgive me. I don't think I've earned that, and I'm not sure I even want it handed to me cheaply. I just didn't want you to spend the rest of your life imagining something worse or smaller than what actually happened. You deserve the real version, even this late. That's what she told me. I sat with it for a long moment before I said anything at all. I didn't shout. I didn't cry, not there, not in front of her, that came later, alone, in the car, in a way I'm not going to pretend didn't happen. What I felt, sitting across from her in that coffee shop, was something closer to grief for a version of my marriage that I now understood had stopped being real long before I found out about it. I'm filing for divorce, I said. I've already spoken to a lawyer. She nodded, like she'd expected it, like some part of her had already made peace with that outcome days ago, alone on our porch steps. The months that followed were quieter than I expected. Phoebe didn't fight the divorce. I think some part of her understood she'd lost the right to fight for anything. She moved out permanently within 3 weeks, into her sister's spare room, and the friends who'd surrounded her at that party thinned out considerably once the full story made its way through the group, the way these things always do. Her mother still speaks to her. Some others don't, not anymore. That was never something I asked for or orchestrated, it was simply the natural consequence of 9 years of trust breaking in a room full of witnesses. John's fallout was smaller but real. Word moved through the office quickly, not from me, I never said a word there, but from someone at that party who worked in his department. He transferred to a different branch within 2 months, and the easy confidence I'd seen in him that day in the break room was, by all accounts, considerably harder to find afterward. Whatever he and Phoebe had told each other about what they were building together didn't survive contact with actual consequences. They haven't spoken, as far as I know, since the week of the party. As for me, I kept the house. I kept Rowan, too, in a strange way. She still checks in every few weeks, still feels like she owes me some debt she doesn't, and I've stopped trying to convince her otherwise because I think she needs to arrive at forgiving herself on her own timeline. Even now, when I think back to that dim stairwell at the anniversary party, something uncomfortable stirs, not grief anymore, not really, but a kind of quiet disbelief at how long I let myself live 2 inches from a door I already suspected was open. I used to think love was the thing that held a marriage together. I don't think that anymore. I think attention does, the willingness to actually look at the things in front of you instead of the version of them you'd prefer to see. I had 9 years of love. I didn't have 9 years of looking, not really, not until the very end, and by then looking wasn't enough to save anything. It was only enough to understand what had already been lost. I'm not angry anymore. That surprised me too, how it faded, not all at once, but slowly, the way a bruise stops announcing itself every time you move. What's left now is something closer to clarity. I know what I'll pay attention to next time. I know what silence actually costs, and I know I'm not willing to pay it again, not for anyone. The last time I saw Phoebe was at the courthouse, signing papers neither of us particularly wanted to sign. She looked at me before we left and said, quietly, "I hope you find someone who deserves you." I didn't say anything back. I think, by then, we'd both already said everything that mattered.